Richard. And we have a funny story to tell you, Richard and I. So I first heard about what a great show he does from Don Young in town. And Don said, oh, you got this guy. We went to this presentation. He was fantastic. And I immediately contacted him and let's go with it. And we went back and forth. And Richard has a few different lineups of songs that he does, themes. And so I said, well, what about for Veterans Day? So, you know, he's obviously really busy around Veterans Day, and we planned tonight. What I saw in my eye was songs of World War II. What Richard was telling me he was going to come play is songs of World War I. So nobody can leave. Because
she already locked the door.
There's some overlap, but the good part is we can have him back and do World War II again, and maybe other people won't be as busy for that show and come out for that. So family-friendly, familiar songs that we all heard, we all loved growing up. I didn't ask Pat, but I think we can sing along.
So sure.
Yeah. So please, you can do your, tell us more about your program than I can at this point, seeing as I had the wrong war, which is really bad for me.
Let's just be happy it wasn't songs of World War III.
That I don't want to see.
Let's not go there.
One thing to check out too are some posters of the time period that Richard brought along to look at, and those are on the back.
The sheet music, actually.
Oh,
sheet music from the time, 100 years ago, yes.
So, I was going to talk about things coming up, but you guys know everything that's coming up because you're always here. Don't forget about the raffle, though. The raffle's good. And the pie sale next week. So if you need some pies, come on back. We have a giant pie sale, and it's going to be good. So, welcome, Richard.
Thank you so much. I pulled into your parking lot, and I saw songs and stories of World War II. And I thought, what? Because I was prepared to do songs and stories of World War I. And
we could have just not told anyone.
So, except they may have started thinking, wait a minute, I don't remember that song from those years. So we talked briefly, and a little mix-up in communication, but that gives us the opportunity, to, as you say, to have an encore presentation. Well, my name is Richard Kruppa. I live in Exeter, New Hampshire. Had a great conversation over here. Turns out that we lived near one another for a long time, Ypsilanti, Michigan, and I lived in Bowling Green, Ohio for all of my working career. Moved to this.
Each other, our football teams.
Right. Our university's teams were in the same conference and used to play one another in various sports. So I'd like to go ahead and start my program. It's called Songs and Stories from World War I, the Great War over there, and the Life and Music over here. As I mentioned and was mentioned, my name is Richard Kruppa. I play and sing songs and tell their stories, and I travel all around New England. I've come to be known as Ramblin Richard, and we had a conversation earlier, and I said, well, I've been to a few libraries in Maine. I've been to Wells, and way up north, way up north, Old Town. Do you know where Old Town is? I was up at Old Town a few weeks ago. Well, it was 100 years ago, this year, 100 years ago, the United States declared war on Germany in April of 1917, and we became participants in World War I. So here's the story and the music. Now I'll have several subtopics as we go along, and I'll intersperse the music in with the subtopics. And it'll be mostly chronological, just enough about the war to remind you of the major things that happened, and with the emphasis on music. So tensions had been growing for Europe for years. Before the Great War, as it was called, all the belligerents had their share of social and economic problems, along with political ones as well. Russia was seething with chronic discontent, presided over by an apathetic and fatalistic czar. The Habsburg Empire of Austria-Hungary was coming apart, its patchwork of ethnicities, and languages were torn by nationalist passions. Germany, for all its economic vigor and sense of purpose, was weighed down by social and cultural tensions, as was its arch-enemy France. In Britain, the strongly separated layers of society sat uneasily atop one another. 4/5 of the population occupied the lowest stratum, ministering to the needs of the 1/5 at the top, supplying the 2 million domestic servants who met their needs. Any of you who watched any of the PBS series Downton Abbey will have a sense of British life at the time. All of the European powers had elected lower houses of parliament. The press was relatively free and citizens could form parties and pressure groups. However, in Austria-Hungary, Germany, and Russia, ministers answered to monarchs rather than to a parliament. The military chiefs were not subordinate to civilian statesmen. The Crown Prince of Germany said that if no war came under his father's rule, he would certainly start one upon ascending to the throne, and he would conquer first France, then England, and then the United States. As tensions mounted, public opinion polarized. More moderate and progressive tendencies became offset by nationalism and militarism. Europe's socialist parties opposed wars of conquest and aggression, but were willing to endorse a war fought for just cause and in self-defense. Now, I'm going to mention just briefly tonight my two grandfathers, both of which had a connection to this time period. I have a connection with the grandfather on my mother's side. He was born and grew up in Austria-Hungary near Budapest. As a young man, he was in their military and a member of the cavalry. He was a bugler. He immigrated to the United States prior to the war in the early 1900s. So let's take a look at American life at the time, just before World War I. Here at home, automobiles had not yet become common. Most people were still using horse-drawn transport. The bicycle was enormously popular with both men and women. More than 10 million were in use at the time, 3 for every car. Susan B. Anthony said that the bicycle did more to liberate women than anything else. 1/3 of our population lived on farms, and while indoor plumbing had become more common in American households, outdoor toilets were the norm. Many people still had to struggle with dirty coal fires, oil lamps. There were no washing machines, no radios, no televisions, of course, or no vacuum cleaners. Children were entitled to at least a basic elementary education by this time, but only about 1/3 enrolled in elementary school and about 10% in high school. The majority who went to school would leave at an early age to go to work, typically about age 12 or 14. Working conditions were often very poor and dangerous, and there were few safety regulations. People worked very long hours. This sometimes led to appalling accidents like the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory disaster in New York City, in which nearly 150 workers, mostly women, were killed when fire broke out. It was an era when large numbers of women were active in social reform. Many were involved in fighting for women's suffrage, and many more in the temperance movement. The New Woman was the name used to describe educated but unmarried career women who were prominent at the time. About half of all female American college graduates in this era never married, choosing instead to devote themselves to careers or to social reform. There were more women doctors, for instance, just before World War I than at any other decade until the 1980s. The United States just before World War I was an economic superpower, rivaling the much older empire nations of Europe, but our military ranked only 17th in the world, with an army of less than 140,000. The U.S. generally adopted an isolationist foreign policy, remaining aloof from the disputes and tensions of Europe. What was the favorite music at the time? Well, the most popular music of the era was ragtime. Composers like Scott Joplin were all the rage. People also loved songs from and about Ireland. And while radio did not yet exist and gramophones were becoming more common, most people made their own music. Any household that could afford it had a piano. And the daughters of the family would learn to play and sing. They would buy sheet music for the latest songs. People learned of the songs by going to the theater as well as to vaudeville. Popular songs of the day. Let's see how many of these titles you either know or can remember. Remember, this is just before World War I. Danny Boy. If You Were the Only Girl in the World. Frankie and Johnny. And I like to end these groups when I can with a humorous title. So I have this one, just before World War I. He had to get out and get under to fix his automobile. May I again? I love it. He had to get out and get under to fix his automobile. Now I'm going to play and sing two songs that were also popular at this time, just before World War I. The first is Alexander's Ragtime Band. Alexander's Ragtime Band was Irving Berlin's first major hit. Berlin may have borrowed the melody from a draft composition by Scott Joplin. Alexander's Ragtime Band refers to the arrival of African-American musicians on the popular scene with their then new idea of playing standard songs in a more exciting up-tempo style. Vaudeville singer Emma Terrace introduced the song in Chicago, and it soon worked its way back to New York, where Al Jolson made it famous. The song has been recorded by many artists over the years, from the Andrews Sisters, Louis Armstrong, and we could go on and on. Just about, I shouldn't say just about many musicians have recorded this tune. Now, the song sold 1 million copies of sheet music in the first month. I want to repeat that. The song sold 1 million copies of sheet music in the first month. Now, think about what an accomplishment that was. It was an unprecedented in its day, unprecedented. Think about how people learned of new songs. They didn't hear them on the radio. Radio didn't exist. They might have heard them as they walked by someone's house and heard someone playing the piano and singing a song. They might have seen the sheet music and thought, oh, that looks interesting. They might have heard the song in a theater, but they didn't have the easy access to music the way we do today. So it was really quite the event to sell 1 million copies of the sheet music for this song in the first month. Alexander's Ragtime Band was Irving Berlin's first major hit, and it established him worldwide as a major songwriter. And this song holds a distinction in American popular music. According to Newsweek magazine, it's the only American song ever to be on the music charts, the popular music charts, in 5 different decades. Well, think about that. 5 different decades, people thought this was a great popular song. 50 years. And there may have been decades in there where it wasn't, but in 5 different decades. So let's do Alexander's Ragtime Band. Do you like to sing? You shake your head, yes. Shake your head. You like to sing? Oh my honey, better hurry and let's meander. Ain't you going to the leader man, ragged music man? Oh my honey, let me take you to Alexander's grandstand, brass band. Ain't you coming along? Come on in here, Alexander's Ragtime Band. Come on in here, it's the best band in the land, where they can play a bugle call like you never heard before, so natural that you want to go to war. That's the bestest band, what am I, honey lamb? Come on along, now let me take you by the hand. Up to the man who is the leader of the band. And if you care to hear that Swanee River played in ragtime, come on in here, Alexander's Ragtime Band. Come on in here, Alexander's Ragtime Band. Ain't you coming along? Alexander's Ragtime Band. Thank you. What a great tune. You know, Irving Berlin wrote over 1,500 songs in his career. Imagine, 1,500 songs. He lived to be 101. He wrote songs for 65 years, a career of 65 years. His name was Isidore Berlin, and he changed it to Irving Berlin because that had more of a showbiz sounding ring to it than Isidore Berlin. All right. I want to do a song called Tooraloo-raloo-roll.
just ask you a very quick question?
Sure, sure.
What instrument did you start with in your musical life?
The drums.
Yeah. Yeah.
Having the name Kruppa, I had no choice.
Yeah.
In the 40s, you know, in the 40s, and named Kruppa, I had to play the drums, so I started with the drums.
And then-
I started these things in college, and
yeah.
then I started real life and worked for a living.
Guitar first and banjo later?
Yeah, banjo just in the last few years. Yeah, the guitar first. Yeah, back in the '60s. Yeah, yeah. All right, so let's do the song Tooraloo-Ralooral. It's an Irish lullaby, a classic Irish-American song by composer James Royce Shannon for the Tin Pan Alley musical Shameen Dew. The song has been recorded and made popular in several decades following its original version. The original recording of the song was by Chauncey Olcott and peaked at #1 on the music charts in 1913. The song was brought back to prominence by Bing Crosby in 1944 in Going My Way. And I think most people know the song from that era. Crosby's single sold over 2 million copies in its day, which is quite an accomplishment. And as recently as 1976, Van Morrison sang this song, and it became the #1 song in the UK, 1976. Other versions recorded by singers as diverse as Connie Francis, Slim Whitman, and the Ames Brothers. How diverse is that? Connie Francis, Slim Whitman, and the Ames Brothers. So let's give this one a whirl. Tooraloo-Ralooral, Tooraloo-Ralooral, oh Tooraloo-Ralooral, that's an Irish lullaby. Oh Tooraloo-Ralooral, Tooraloo-Ralooral, oh Tooraloo-Ralooral, that's my Irish lullaby. Over in Killarney, many years ago, me mother sang a song to me in tones so sweet and low, just a simple little ditty in her good old Irish way. And I'd give the world if she could sing that song to me today. Come on and join me now. Tooraloo-Ralooral, Tooraloo-Ralooral, oh Tooraloo-Ralooral, oh hush now, don't you cry. Tooraloo-Ralooral, Tooraloo-Ralooral, oh Tooraloo-Ralooral, that's an Irish lullaby. Oh Tooraloo-Ralooral, that's an Irish lullaby. Tooraloo-Ralooral. Thank you. So in 1914, the war began. On June 28th that year, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his wife Sophie were assassinated by Serbian nationalist Gavrilo Princip in Sarajevo, Bosnia. An escalation of threats and mobilization orders followed, leading by mid-August to the outbreak of World War I. It pitted Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, referred to as the Central Powers, against Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, and Japan, the Allied powers. President Woodrow Wilson announced that the U.S. would remain neutral and would avoid becoming involved in the war. When World War I began, many participating nations were optimistic that it would be over in a matter of months. Instead, nation after nation was dragged into a bloody conflict that lasted 4 years. That September, the First Battle of the Marne, which employed trench warfare, began, and soldiers on both sides dug in. It followed the illegal entry by Germany into and through Belgium. Great Britain entered the war due to a treaty that required them to help defend Belgium. In October, the Battle of Ypres began, and Great Britain blockaded goods entering Germany. On balance, 1914 was a disappointing year for the Allies and a correspondingly positive one for Germany and the Central Powers. How about the music of 1914? Well, here at home there was little interest in wartime-themed music. The U.S. population generally embraced isolationism, and an anti-war sentiment was very common. Popular songs that year, 1914, included La Cucaracha, When You Wore a Tulip, and Abba Dabba Honeymoon. You remember Abba Dabba Honeymoon? Abba Dabba 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 said the monkey to the chimp. You remember it because it became popular again in the 50s. And it was very...
Godfrey's time.
Beg pardon?
During the era of Arthur Godfrey, I kept hearing that song when my mother tuned into Arthur
Yes,
Godfrey.
yes. And I'm glad you mentioned Arthur Godfrey. How many know about Arthur Godfrey? All of you? Okay. Well, then I can mention that this instrument that I'm playing is the Baritone Ukulele. I haven't yet played it. It's the Baritone Ukulele. It's the kind of instrument that Arthur Godfrey used to play. Most ukes that you're acquainted with are smaller than this. And the most common is called the Soprano Ukulele, which is only about half the length of this guy. And but this one's fun. It has a really nice sweet tone. And if it has a familiar ring to it, it's maybe because you remember your mother listening to Arthur Godfrey. So I want to do this tune, When Irish Eyes Are Smiling, a lighthearted song about Ireland, composed for a Broadway show that was a tribute to a romanticized Ireland. The show was called The Isle of Dreams. The song was very popular all through the First World War, continued to be a familiar standard for generations. Now, in the 1940s, it was used for the opening theme song of a radio show called Duffy's Tavern. Does that sound familiar to anybody? I see a few heads shaking up and down. Duffy's Tavern. Well, in the familiar opening of the show, the radio show, the song would start, When Irish Eyes Are Smiling would start, and it would be interrupted by the ringing of a telephone. A man would answer the phone and he would say, "Hello, Duffy's Tavern, where the elite meet to eat. This is Archie the manager speaking. Duffy ain't here." Then the next line was always the same. "Oh, hello, Duffy." It was always Duffy calling for some reason. Then they'd go back to the music and into the show. So When Irish Eyes Are Smiling was the theme song for Duffy's Tavern. The song has been recorded in over 200 singles and made famous, of course, by Bing Crosby and a number of other singers as well. So come on and sing with me, When Irish Eyes Are Smiling. When Irish eyes are smiling, sure 'tis like the morning spring. In the lilt of Irish laughter, you can hear the angels sing. When Irish hearts are happy, all the world seems bright and gay. And when Irish eyes are smiling, sure they steal your heart away. Let's do it again. When Irish eyes are smiling, sure 'tis like the morning spring. In the lilt of Irish laughter, you can hear the angels sing. When Irish hearts are happy, all the world seems bright and gay. And when Irish eyes are smiling, sure they steal your heart away. And when Irish eyes are smiling, sure they steal your heart away. When Irish eyes are smiling.
You have a great voice.
Well, thank you very much.
For singing and doing what you do.
Well, thank you. I was a radio announcer, one of my very first jobs in my 20s. Maybe that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
Next tune. It's a Long Way to Tipperary. It's a Long Way to Tipperary. A British music hall song written by Jack Judge and Harry Williams. Became popular among soldiers in the First World War and is remembered as a song from that time. During World War I, a London Daily Mail correspondent saw the Irish regiment, the Connaught Rangers, singing this song as they marched along. He reported what he saw in the newspaper. One of the most popular hits of the time, the song is atypical in that it is not a warlike song that incites soldiers to glorious deeds. In the First World War, the most popular songs concentrated on the longing for home. So this is It's a Long Way to Tipperary. It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye Piccadilly, and farewell Leicester Square. It's a long, long way to Tipperary, but my heart's right there. Up to mighty London came an Irishman one day. As the streets were paved with gold, everyone was gay, singing songs of Piccadilly, Strand and Leicester Square, till Paddy got excited and he shouted to them there. You ready? It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye Piccadilly, farewell Leicester Square. It's a long, long way to Tipperary, but my heart's right there. It's a long, long way to Tipperary, but my heart's right there. It's a long way to Tipperary. Now I'd like to sing the song that was the most popular song that summer here in the U.S., the summer of 1914. Now remember that while they were spiraling downward into war in Europe, here at home, things were going pretty well. The economy was buzzing right along and people were having just a happy, happy time. And I want to do this tune that was so popular. I think most of you will be acquainted with this song. It's called By the Beautiful Sea. It was written by Harry Carroll and Harold Attridge. And the most popular version that summer was recorded by a group called the Heidelberg Quintet. And it topped the American music charts, the #1 song, for 6 weeks. So it was, as you can see, quite the popular song. So everybody here in the U.S. was singing this happy-go-lucky song while Europe was spiraling downward into war. By the sea, by the sea, by the beautiful sea. I think I'm in the wrong key. By the sea, there we go, by the beautiful sea. You and I, oh how happy we'll be. When each wave comes a-rolling in, we will duck or swim, and we'll float and fool around the water, over and under and then up for air. Pa is rich, Ma is rich, so now what do we care? I'd love to be beside your side, beside the sea, beside the seaside, by the beautiful sea. By the sea, by the sea, by the beautiful sea. You and I, oh how happy we'll be. When each wave comes a-rolling in, we will duck or swim, and we'll float and fool around the water, over and under and then up for air. Pa is rich, Ma is rich, so now what do we care? I'd love to be beside your side, beside the sea, beside the seaside, by the beautiful sea. Yes, I'd love to be beside your side, beside the sea, beside the seaside, by the beautiful sea. By the beautiful sea. Okay, so 10 times real fast. I'd love to be beside your side, beside the sea, beside the seaside. Your turn. I'd love to be beside the sea, beside the sea. You got the idea. By the Beautiful Sea. Wonderful tune from 1914. Well, in 1915, the war continued. Germany declared a war zone around Great Britain, and all vessels became potential targets. The Dardanelles campaign in Turkey began, as did the Second Battle of Ypres, where for the first time the Germans used poison gas. Nearly 1,200 died when the British ocean liner Lusitania was sunk by a German U-boat. And I might make a comment, I'm sure you have the book, called Dead Wake, the story of the last voyage of the Lusitania. Very interesting, and it has quite a bit in it about the coming war. Tsar Nicholas II took personal control over Russia's armies, and as in 1914, 1915 was to prove another disappointing year for the Allies and a correspondingly positive one for the Central Powers. The music of 1915. The Old Rugged Cross. Pack up your troubles in your old kit bag. Paper Doll. And Keep the Home Fires Burning. And then there were these two. I just love to do these two. Mademoiselle from Armand Terrace. Some of you may know this tune. Risque song that was particularly popular during World War I, also known by its ersatz French line, Hinky Dinky Parlez-vous. I just love it. It's like a tennis ball bouncing. Hinky Dinky Parlez-vous. The tune was believed to be popular in the French army back as far as the 1830s, and the original words told of an encounter of an innkeeper's daughter with two German officers. During the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, the tune was resurrected, and again in 1915. The song was recorded that year by a man named Jack Charman. So let's see if you remember this tune. This is a lot of fun. Mademoiselle from Armand Terrace, parlez-vous. Mademoiselle from Armand Terrace, parlez-vous. Mademoiselle from Armand Terrace, she hasn't been kissed in 40 years. Hinky dinky parlez-vous. Mademoiselle from Armand Terrace, parlez-vous. Mademoiselle from Armand Terrace, parlez-vous. She never could hold the love of a man. She took her baths in a talcum can. Hinky dinky parlez-vous. Mademoiselle from Armand Terrace, parlez-vous. Mademoiselle from Armand Terrace, parlez-vous. She had 4 chins, her knees would knock, her face would stop a cuckoo clock. Hinky dinky parlez-vous. Mademoiselle from Armand Terrace, parlez-vous. Mademoiselle from Armand Terrace, parlez-vous. Just blow your nose and dry your tears. We'll all be back in a few short years. Hinky dinky parlez-vous. Mademoiselle from Armand Terrace. All right, so this song remained popular in World War II, and as you might guess from the subject matter, there were lots of parodies and other versions of this song, mostly of a risque nature. And I have one of the milder ones. I'm going to do just one verse from this one from World War II. See, you did get your World War II program. We just edit all of that out, the World War II. And so here's that version that came around during World War II. The first Marine, he found the bean, parlez-vous. The second Marine, he cooked the bean, parlez-vous. The third Marine, he ate the bean and blew apart the submarine. Hinky dinky parlez-vous. So there you go. See, it was a World War II program after all.
There we go.
All right. Mademoiselle from Armand Terrace. The next song that I'm going to do, I have the sheet music back there, and it's when we think of anti-war songs, we think of the Vietnam era. This is an anti-war song from that year, 1915, and surprisingly, it was the major hit of the year, 1915. The song is titled, I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier. An American anti-war song influential within the pacifist movement at the time. One of the first anti-war songs from the period, and as I mentioned, was the major hit in 1915. It expressed the popular pacifist sentiment at the time, and other songs followed. Songs like Don't Take My Darling Boy Away, and Jolly Good Luck to the Girl Who Loves a Soldier. and When I Leave This World Behind. These are just a few of the songs that followed. The song inspired some imitations and also some scornful parodies. The somber nature of the lyrics also reflected the neutrality way of thinking that was common in the United States in 1915. It helped solidify the anti-war movement enough to make it relevant on the national scene. The song was in the top 20 of the music charts from January to July of 1915, 6 months, and was the #1 song in the country for 8 weeks, March and into April. The song's success and resulting political strength brought supporters to the pacifist movement whose main priority had been other issues, such as the campaign for women's right to vote. But some prominent politicians attacked the song, both for its pacifism and its early feminism. Theodore Roosevelt remarked that, I'm quote now, "Foolish people who applaud a song entitled 'I Didn't Raise My Boy to Be a Soldier' are just the people who would also applaud a song entitled 'I Didn't Raise My Girl to Be a Mother.'" So there, thank you, Theodore Roosevelt. So here we go. This is "I Didn't Raise My Boy to Be a Soldier," and I always like to ask, because just about every other song I do, you tend to know a little bit of it. You recognize it if you hear it. Anybody familiar with the song "I Didn't Raise My Boy to Be a Soldier"? Have you heard it? It's typically maybe one person, sometimes two in the group. Well, you're acquainted with it?
No, I wonder if Pete Seeger picked up on that and sang it.
Boy, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier. I brought him up to be my pride and joy. Who dares to put a musket on his shoulder to shoot some other mother's darling boy? Let nations arbitrate their future troubles. It's time to lay the sword and gun away. There'd be no war today if mothers all would say, "I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier." I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier, to go fighting in some far-off foreign land. He may get killed before he's any older, for a cause that he will never understand. Why should we fight another rich man's battle, while they stay home and while their time away? Let those with most to lose fight each other if they choose, for I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier. I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier. Well, the war continues for another year, 1916. Early in 1916, the Battle of Verdun began. Employing 3 million soldiers, it became the largest battle in world history up to that time. In the end, the French halted the German advance and regained their lost territory, but both sides suffered some 800,000 casualties. This is a battle, 800,000 casualties. More than 70,000 a month for 10 months. It became the longest battle of the war and one of the bloodiest. The German death toll was 143,000. The French lost over 162,000. Verdun came to signify more than any other battle the grinding, bloody nature of warfare on the Western Front. Also, later in the year in France, the First Battle of the Somme began, and tanks were introduced into battle for the first time. 14,000 British casualties occurred in the first 10 minutes. Let me say that again. 14,000 British casualties occurred in the first 10 minutes. 50,000 by day's end. It was the worst day of any war for the British. Here at home, President Wilson was re-elected, appealing to the popular anti-war mood in the country. His campaign slogans included, and these are quotes, "He kept us out of war," and "America first." Now to the music of 1916. Popular songs that year included "I Ain't Got Nobody," "If You Were the Only Girl in the World," "Pretty Baby," Got that one back there too, Pretty Baby. Oh, Sole Mio. And oh, you're going to love this one. Oh, how she could yacky, hacky, wicky, wacky do. Let me do that again. Oh, how she could yacky, hacky, wicky, wacky do. All right. And I'm going to do a song that was very popular that year as well. It's called Play a Simple Melody. A song from the musical Watch Your Step with words and music by Irving Berlin, his first stage musical. It's the only song from the show that is well remembered today, and it's one of the few examples of counterpoint in American popular music, a melody running against a second melody, each with its own independent lyrics. So you can sing one at the same time someone else is singing the other, and they fit together nicely, kind of like a hand in a glove. When Play a Simple Melody was published, Ragtime was in its heyday, led by the most consummate composer, as I mentioned, Scott Joplin. The recording was made in 1916 by a lady named Elsie Baker. Commonly performed as a duet, the song emerged again in 1950 when Bing and Gary Crosby recorded it. And if you're familiar with the song, no doubt it's from that time and that recording that was so popular. It was a hit then and rose to near the top of the hit parade. I mentioned earlier, I believe, Irving Berlin was born Isidore Berlin in Russia. He immigrated to the U.S. with his family in 1893. Over his 65-year-long career, he penned over 1,500 songs, and some of the best known, such as God Bless America, which he wrote when he was in World War I in the Army, Easter Parade, White Christmas, so many others. Irving Berlin died in 1989 at the age 101. Walter Cronkite, Berlin's 100th birthday tribute, said, and this is a quote now, "He helped write the story of this country, capturing the best of who we are and the dreams that shape our lives." So let's do Play a Simple Melody. Won't you play a simple melody, just like my mother sang to me? Oh, one with good old-fashioned harmony. Play a simple melody. Now here's that second one. Oh, musical demon, set your honey a dream, and won't you play me some rag? Just change that classical knack to some sweet, beautiful drag. If you will play from a copy that tune that is choppy, you'll get all my applause. And that is simply because I want to listen to rag. Oh, won't you play a simple melody, just like my mother sang to me? One with good old-fashioned harmony. Play a simple melody. Yes, play a simple melody. Play a simple melody. I wish I could do two parts at one time. I'd put them together. Yeah.
Wasn't that written so that the second part that you were saying could be sung with the first part? Too?
Yes, exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's harmonically compatible.
Right. So if you all were to sing, won't you play a simple melody, then I could sing musical demon, said your honey a dreaming. Yeah.
I wish I knew all the words.
It might take a little while to rehearse all of that. But just use your imaginations. All right. I want to move now to the year 1917. In that year, the United States entered the war. In March, Russian Tsar Nicholas II abdicated, and the Bolsheviks successfully overthrew the monarchy during the Russian Revolution. Then an armistice agreed upon between the new Russian government and the Central Powers went into effect. Now, we had desperately tried to stay neutral, but ties to Britain, the sinking of our ships by German U-boats, propaganda, and a German attempt to get Mexico to declare war on us pushed the United States into the conflict. President Wilson went before a joint session of Congress to request a declaration of war against Germany. It was granted and declared on April 6th, 100 years ago. and against Germany's ally Austria-Hungary later in the year. We were now at war. The United States was involved for the last 19 months, April 1917 to November 1918. Though we had a small army of less than 140,000 when we entered, by war's end over 4.3 million men had been conscripted into service. This was accomplished as our government reinstated the draft. Oh, I'm sorry, it was called selective service. Reinstated the draft for the first time since the Civil War. So what was life like here at home at the time we entered World War I, 1917? Well, daily life was affected as men were drafted and sent abroad. Women had to fill their places on the farms and in the factories. Children had less time to spend with their family members and were expected to grow up faster and help with the war effort. Those involved in youth organizations collected money for war through bonds and stamps. And meanwhile, every farm, town, city, and economic sector was mobilized for the war effort. Tens of millions took wartime jobs or joined voluntary organizations such as the Red Cross. The home front saw a systematic mobilization of the entire population and economy to produce the soldiers' food supplies, munitions, and raise the money to fight the war. There had been very little planning for the war by our government, and as a result, the level of confusion was high in that first 12 months, but then efficiency took over. But much of the population was reluctant to get behind the war early on. President Wilson established the Committee on Public Information, also known as the CPI, to build support. Sounds suspicious, doesn't it? In some ways, it was becoming a troubling time as the interests of various factions collided. People of all stripes marched and demonstrated for and against. Popular songs of the year, 1917, the year we entered the war: The Darktown Strutter's Ball, Down in the Valley, Hail, Hail, the Gang's All Here, I'm Always Chasing Rainbows, Oh, Johnny, Oh, and you're going to love this one, Goodbye, Ma, Goodbye, Pa, Goodbye, Mule with your old hee-haw. I just have to do that again. Sorry. Goodbye, Ma, goodbye, Pa, goodbye, Mule with your old hee-haw. And then this song was so popular. Over There. George M. Cohan wrote that song in 1917. It was popular with the United States military and the public in both World War I and World War II. It's a patriotic song that was designed to galvanize America's young men to enlist in the Army to fight the Hun. The song is best remembered for a line in the chorus, "The Yanks Are Coming." Cohan wrote the song Over There on April 7th, 1917, just one day after President Woodrow Wilson declared war on Germany, and we entered the conflict on the side of the Allies. The song reflected Americans' expectations that the war would be short. Inspired by President Wilson's actions, Cohan wrote the song in under 2 hours. And he did that while traveling on the train from New Rochelle, New York to New York City. The song was introduced to the public in the fall of 1917, just about this time, when it was sung at a Red Cross benefit in New York City. It would later become the most popular song during the war. Over 2 million copies of the sheet music were sold of this song. Later, in 1936, then President Franklin Roosevelt awarded Cohan the Congressional Gold Medal for this and his other patriotic songs. I'm not sure if you're acquainted with the verses in Over There. Everybody knows the refrain. So I'll do a verse or two and also do that refrain that everybody knows. Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Take it on the run, on the run, on the run. Hear them calling you and me, every son of liberty. Hurry right away, no delay, go today. Make your daddy glad to have had such a lad. Tell your sweetheart not to pine, to be proud her boy's in line. Over there, Send the word over there. At the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming, the drums rum-tumming everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer, send the word to beware. That will be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over there. We won't come back till it's over there. Over there, thank you. And thank George M. Cohan. All right, now we go into the year 1918. The war ended in that fourth year, 1918. While President Wilson committed the United States to the war to, quote, make the world safe for democracy, as he stated it, here at home, democratic ideals deteriorated. Congress passed the Espionage and Sedition Acts to suppress opposition. It became a crime to say negative things about the government or about the war. Showing international leadership skills, Wilson issued his 14 Points to Peace, a statement of principles for ending the war. It became the blueprint for securing the armistice and later the Treaty of Versailles. Meanwhile, American troops fought on the Western Front in France under General John Pershing, commander of the American Expeditionary Forces. Doughboys, as they were called, were trained and sent off to France at the rate of 10,000 a day. Let me say that again. Doughboys were trained and sent off to France at the rate of 10,000 a day. American soldiers earned the name doughboys because there are three explanations. So you can take your pick, whichever one sounds the most reasonable to you. I found three different explanations of where the term doughboy came from. First, the buttons on their uniforms resembled the donuts of the day. So the doughboys were coming. Then number two, that as the troops would march along in line, they would kick up dust, and the dust would settle on them over time, and they would look like dough. That was the second explanation. And then the third explanation was that they loved donuts, and in France, volunteers for the Salvation Army would regularly bring them donuts. Thus, they were the doughboys. Well, you can take your pick. There's no one definitive argument that I've found anyway. Well, by August that year, 1918, 1 million American troops had arrived in France. The efforts of our fresh fighting forces took a toll on the resolve of a tired and overextended German army. At the Second Battle of the Somme, there were massive casualties. More than 1 million killed and wounded. The British incurred 60,000 on the first day alone. Doughboys were killed at the rate of 500 a day for 47 days. But peace was at last achieved as a thoroughly exhausted Germany signed the armistice at Compiègne, France. Fighting ended on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the day that became known in 1938 as Armistice Day. It wasn't a holiday until 20 years later. Today we celebrate Veterans Day on November 11th, recognizing the service and sacrifice of all members of our military. I have a story about my other grandfather. My other grandfather was a scientist. He was a botanist. He and a colleague founded the New York Botanical Garden. He traveled during the war years to and from various South American ports. He was exploring. And he went from New York. He wrote the following in the Journal of the New York Botanical Garden in February of 1918. I'm quoting him now. We took on board in Rio de Janeiro 8 or 10 victims of German depredations in Brazilian waters, and New York was reached on April 29th. I'm sorry to recount, however, that our good ship, the Verdi, a few weeks afterwards, while in European waters, was sent to the bottom by the Kaiser's ruthlessness. End of quote. All right, how about the music of 1918? Well, popular music changed dramatically once we were at war. About 80% of the copyrighted songs in 1918 had wartime themes. Here are a few of them. After You've Gone, Oh, How I Hate to Get Up in the Morning, When Alexander takes his ragtime band to France, and you're going to love this one. Would you rather be a colonel with an eagle on your shoulder or a private with a chicken on your knee? May I? Would you rather be a colonel with an eagle on your shoulder or a private with a chicken on your knee? Well, my final song tonight is one of the most memorable from the war. It came as the war ended, and it's called How You Gonna Keep 'Em Down on the Farm. Written by Walter Donaldson, Joe Young, and Sam Lewis, it rose to popularity just as the war ended. The lyrics highlight the concern that American soldiers from rural environments would not want to return to farm life after experiencing the European city life and the culture of Paris during World War I. The song was first introduced into vaudeville by Sophie Tucker, and then later by Eddie Cantor. He used it in his shows. Like many World War I songs, it was sung by soldiers in World War II. And Judy Garland sang it in her 1942 film For Me and My Gal, which was a song about World War I bravery, and a movie about World War I bravery. So, I just love this one. I can hardly contain myself when I do this song. I just love it. So I'll try to keep my enthusiasm on the floor rather than up on the ceiling. How you gonna keep them down on the farm after they've seen Perry? How you gonna keep them away from liquor, jazzing around and painting the town? How you gonna keep them away from harm? That's a mystery. They'll never want to see a rake or a plow, and who the deuce can parley-vous a cow? Oh, how you gonna keep them down on the farm after they've seen Perry? Reuben, Reuben, I've been thinking, said his wifey dear, now that things are peaceful and calm, soon the boys will be back on the farm. Mr. Reuben started winking, slowly rubbed his chin. He pulled his chair up close to Mother and asked her with a grin, how you gonna keep them down on the farm after they've seen Perry? How you gonna keep them away from liquor, jazzing around and painting the town? How you gonna keep them away from harm? That's the mystery. Imagine Reuben when he greets his pa. He'll kiss his cheek and holler, ooh la la. How you gonna keep them down on the farm after they've seen Perry? How you gonna keep them down on the farm after they've seen Perry? How you gonna keep them down on the farm? By the way, I have that sheet music back there as well if you want to take a look at it. One of the things that's interesting about the sheet music, if you read the back of some of them, you'll see that the way you purchased sheet music at the time was to send a number of stamps, and in exchange you would be sent the sheet music. And one of them at least talks about sending 6 2-cent stamps, and one of them talks about buying a set, I believe, of 9 songs for so many stamps. Kind of an interesting way to do commerce at the time.
So what happened to the stamps?
I suspect they were used in commerce generally. Maybe they bought supplies using stamps as a currency. Be my guess.
Yeah.
So what was the legacy of World War I? Well, the 4 years of the Great War saw unprecedented level of carnage and destruction, thanks to the grueling trench warfare, the introduction of modern weaponry such as machine guns, tanks, and chemical weapons. World War I took the lives of more than 9 million soldiers, and 21 million more were wounded. Civilian casualties occurring by war's end numbered close to 10 million. The two nations most affected were Germany and France, each of which had sent some 80% of their male populations between the ages of 15 and 49 into battle. In those countries, nearly an entire generation was lost to the conflict. Close to 117,000 members of the U.S. military died during those 19 months. far fewer than the other participating countries, but nearly the size of our army at the beginning of the war. Restrictions on democracy and latent discontent regarding the war changed the balance of Congress in 1918 from Democrat, Wilson's party, to Republican. Congress proposed changes to the Treaty of Versailles, but President Wilson was unyielding. Thus, the U.S. never ratified the treaty that he had structured and was accepted by the other warring nations. But we established our own separate treaties in the years that followed. The toll of the war and of politics spelled the end of Woodrow Wilson's leadership at home. He became ill and suffered a series of strokes, rendering him an invalid in the White House. But Wilson's international leadership was recognized in 1919 as he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Elsewhere, the war marked the fall of 4 imperial dynasties: Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, and the Ottoman Empire, and some of the borders of Europe were redrawn. Most European economies were bankrupted, and the nations lost many of their international colonies. World War I was called the War to End All Wars because it was so destructive. It was thought that the nations of the world would surely prevent such slaughter from ever happening again. Proposed solutions like the League of Nations emerged. The Treaty of Versailles, drafted in 1919, sought to limit Germany's capacity to rebuild its military. The most controversial part involved Germany's war reparations, a punitive debt the Allied nations insisted that they pay. The ruinous terms of the treaty almost destroyed Germany's economy and led to the rise of the Nazi Party just 1 year later, in 1920. Unfortunately, rather than end all wars, the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles set the stage for World War II. I want to mention another book that you may find interesting in addition to Dead Wake, which I mentioned earlier. There's one called The Last of the Doughboys. I don't know if you have it in your library. Really interesting reading. It was written by a man who came to believe that World War I was becoming the forgotten war. And he wanted to resurrect stories about veterans from World War I while they were still alive. And I believe he wrote it in the 1980s. And one of the things that I recall from the book was that our last World War I veteran was a man named Fred Buckles. He lived in West Virginia, and he died in 2011. He was 110 years old. So you might find that book interesting, the stories of the last of the doughboys and their experiences in World War I. So thank you so much for attending. I enjoyed the brief description of the war, the songs that accompanied the various years, and I look forward to seeing you again sometime. Bye-bye.